The envelope was heavier than it needed to be. Cream-colored, thick paper, gold embossing. Evelyn never did anything halfway. Her wedding invitation sat in my hand like it weighed more than a simple card should, as if it carried consequences I hadn't yet understood. I ran my finger over the edges, admiring the calligraphy. She was finally getting her fairy tale, and I was happy for her, genuinely. Mavis had already placed the card neatly on the mantel, as if it belonged there alongside our wedding photo and a few tasteful trophies from her real estate accolades. She'd offered, no, insisted, on covering the entire wedding, from the floral arches to the private resort venue. Said it was her gift to Evelyn and my family. My sister deserved it, sure, but I couldn't shake the feeling Mavis had another reason. Our house was spotless, of course, always was. Chrome fixtures, white marble floors, everything curated like a magazine spread. People often called us the power couple. Mavis, the million-dollar closer, and me, the quiet accountant. The balance worked, at least it used to. I watched her flip through the wedding menu drafts like it was her own event. Every detail mattered to her. Too much. I leaned on the doorway, arms crossed, smiling faintly. "She's going to love it," I said. Mavis didn't look up. "I know." A beat of silence. Then she said it casually, like it didn't mean anything. "Oh, and I added one more guest. Hope that's okay." I tilted my head. "Who?" "Xander." And just like that, the air in the room changed. Xander, her ex-husband. She said it like she was talking about the caterer. I blinked. "Xander, as in your ex?" "Yeah," she said, not missing a beat. "We ended on good terms. He's practically family." I waited for the punchline. None came. "Mavis, you've never even mentioned his name before," I said, my voice even but tight. She shrugged. "What's the big deal?" "It's just a wedding. He won't bite." But it wasn't just a wedding. It was my sister's wedding. Our life. Years ago, when we first got married, she'd looked me in the eye and said the past was done. No baggage, no ghosts. She told me Xander was history. Now that ghost had a seat at the table, right next to my family. She walked away, leaving the question floating in the air. That night, I sat alone in my office, the invitation still in my hand. I stared at her handwriting, the way she'd signed it, "With love, Mavis." I didn't feel the love. I felt dismissed. My phone buzzed. "Mom." "Just wanted to say how generous Mavis is," she gushed. "We're lucky to have her in the family." Right. Mavis, the saint. I was invisible again. Just the younger brother tagging along. Evelyn texted next. "You guys are angels. Can't believe this is happening." At dinner, Mavis held court like a queen. Suggested flower arrangements, picked the seating chart, even floated the idea of giving the main speech. I nodded, chewed, swallowed. But inside, I was burning. I've always been the peacekeeper, the one who lets things go, but this was something else. In America, people think the loudest voice wins, but sometimes the strongest person is the one who says nothing until the right time. That night, I started a journal. Every comment, every look. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew something wasn't right. The next day, I replayed old conversations in my head, little moments I'd brushed off, late nights, unexplained texts, her locking her phone when I walked in. Was this always there, hiding in plain sight? I'm not flashy. I'm not loud. I'm an accountant. I observe. I remember. So I asked her again. "Why him, Mavis? Why now?" She looked at me like I was slow. "Because I can. It's my money." That hit harder than I expected. I grabbed my keys and walked out. First time I'd ever left like that. No words, no storming, just silence. I drove until the gas tank dipped below half, then pulled over at a diner. Sat in the car, staring at the invitation again. This time, I didn't see a celebration. I saw a warning and a question. What kind of woman invites her ex-husband to her current husband's family wedding and expects applause? The valet stand was buzzing with weekend energy. Wedding prep always stirred up chaos, and I'd arrived at the Austin resort a couple of days early to help Evelyn manage logistics. I'd promised her I'd handle the boring stuff, checklists, room blocks, timelines, something I could do without emotion. I stepped out of the car and handed the keys to the valet when a familiar laugh made me freeze. There, near the lobby entrance, stood Mavis, wrapped in a too-warm embrace with a tall man in a gray suit. I didn't need to guess. That posture, that closeness, it was him, Xander. He wasn't supposed to be here until the morning of the wedding. That's what she told me. But the way she stood with him, her hand resting too long on his shoulder, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. She arranged this. I walked over slowly. My steps were steady, but inside me something surged, something cold, protective, primal. When I got close enough to see the smile on his face, I offered my hand. "I'm the current husband," I said plainly, looking him in the eye. "You must be the antique." He laughed like it was charming. Mavis gave me a quick glare, then forced a laugh too. "You're impossible," she said under her breath. I didn't respond. I just took my bag and followed them in. Later, she brushed it off. "He came early, that's all." I didn't know. She always knew. I asked about his room. "Oh, I booked it for him weeks ago, same floor as ours. Just easier for logistics," she said, like it was a perfectly normal thing to do, inviting your ex-husband to sleep a few doors down from your current one. In the elevator, Xander glanced around and chuckled. "Bet this hotel's seen its fair share of husband swaps." I didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction. You think people don't notice, I thought to myself. But they do. They always do. That evening, we had a family dinner in the private dining room downstairs. I expected awkwardness. What I didn't expect was the seating chart. Mavis and Xander side by side, me, 2 seats down. They were laughing, clinking glasses like old friends, maybe more than friends. Around the table, no one seemed fazed. To them, this was progressive. Look how mature they are. So modern, so evolved. The illusion of a blended family, sleek and curated like a real estate brochure. I smiled. I nodded. I kept the performance going. Then Xander stood up during toasts. He held his glass high and said, "Mavis always had this thing about hotel pillows. Couldn't sleep without rearranging them in a very specific way. Drove me crazy, but..." He smiled. "I guess that's part of her charm." The table burst into laughter. Even Evelyn giggled. I didn't laugh. I looked at Mavis. She was smiling at him. That was the moment. I remembered a night, years back, when she'd said, "You're the only one who truly sees me." I believed her. Now I wasn't so sure she even saw me at all. I excused myself, walked out to the balcony. The night air didn't help much. My chest felt tight. I leaned on the railing, watching the lights of downtown in the distance. My dad's voice came back to me. He used to say, "Sometimes you don't see the fire until you smell the smoke." I was smelling it now. Back in our suite, I waited for her. When she came in, I asked quietly, "Why are you letting him talk about you like that?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. It was harmless." "No," I said. "It was personal. Too personal." "You're being too sensitive." "Sensitivity isn't weakness," I said. "It's awareness." She didn't respond. Just walked into the bathroom and closed the door. I stood there in silence, then walked over to my laptop, opened a blank document, titled it Asset Protection Draft. I wasn't filing anything, not yet. But for the first time in our marriage, I was preparing for a line she might actually cross. This wasn't just about an ex-husband anymore. This was about me, my dignity, my place in this story, and I was done playing background. I arrived at the outdoor venue just as twilight settled in. The tables were lit with soft lanterns, and the air held the scent of jasmine and grilled salmon. Mavis had told me she was helping Evelyn, as if that gave her permission to vanish when it suited her. I walked slowly past guests laughing, couples leaning in close, the kind of intimacy we once shared. Inside, the seating chart had changed. My name was pushed to a corner table, far from the bridal party. Next to me sat relatives I barely knew, faces blank with polite curiosity. Across the room, Mavis sat beside Xander again, smiling, leaning in, touching his arm casually. Their laughter echoed, easy and unguarded, while the rest of us sat on display. Her family's whispers followed me. I caught snippets. Oh, how things change. Quite bold of her. They make quite the picture. The voices felt like knives in my ribs. One guest leaned over and asked quietly, "So, how does it feel sitting with the ex next to your wife?" I pressed my lips together, measured my tone, and replied, "Like watching someone live in a dream I can't wake from." They laughed awkwardly. Mavis's posture remained relaxed. She was telling the story, and I was expected to fall silent. I stepped away and texted her, "Meet me in the garden." She appeared behind me a few moments later, fairy lights flickering around her, casting long shadows. I didn't want to raise my voice, but the hurt was too loud. "This isn't just awkward, Mavis, it's humiliating." She brushed back a strand of hair. "You're playing this too big. It's Everlynn's night, not a scene from a play." I felt a surge of anger. "Then why does it feel like you're starring in it?" Her reply came with a shrug. "Because someone has to be the grown-up." That's when I heard a soft gasp behind me. Everlynn stood there, trembling, her eyes wide with confusion and pain. She said, "If you two are going to ruin this, maybe don't come tomorrow." Then she walked away before I could respond. Mavis turned to me, frustration in her eyes. "See what happens?" she hissed. I didn't answer. Back at the dinner table, the world moved on. Glasses clinked. Laughter resumed. The illusion resumed. I sat there watching her lean toward Xander, as though our marriage was just another story she retold at parties. A voice from our side called out, "Speech from the groom's side!" The mic made its way down until it reached me. I stood head high, tension in my chest, and looked out. "Sometimes," I said, voice steady, "the greatest gift isn't showing up, it's knowing when to walk away." Silence swallowed the table. A few claps resounded nervously. Mavis avoided my gaze. The moment hung heavy. Later, in my hotel room, I stood before the mirror. The eyes staring back looked worn but fierce. I whispered to that reflection, "Why are you still trying to belong where you're clearly being erased?" Nothing answered. I opened my computer and began writing, not a message to her, but a vow to myself. You will no longer shrink to make others comfortable. Then I opened my accounts, checked old documents, reviewed lines of credit I hadn't touched in years. This wasn't vengeance. This was preparation. My grandfather used to say, "A man with peace doesn't need power, but he'll take it if pushed." Tonight, I felt that push. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight, I am awake. I slipped away from the main dining hall, needing air. The evening warmth still clung to the garden paths, but shadows stretched long. I edged behind potted shrubs, watching staff move silently. Plates passed, floral arrangements adjusted, lights dimmed in careful increments. Nothing here was spontaneous tonight. From the fringe, I caught Mavis speaking with Gideon. Her voice was low, his face close. I heard her whisper, "You did well tonight." My chest tightened. This wasn't friendly counsel, it was orchestration. She was coordinating him, treating him like an ally, like a co-star. Inside the hall, the lighting shifted, chandeliers dimmed, candles flared. The mood was intimate, electric. Security quietly repositioned. Cameras trained on Mavis and Gideon, their faces framed for maximum effect. A guest in passing murmured, "They set that up for photo ops." I felt something inside me recoil. When I returned to the table, the menu cards had changed. My name was gone. No notice, no warning. Someone nudged me and said quietly, "Wasn't he supposed to be included in the toasts?" I forced a smile. Mavis lifted her glass with elegance, nodding to Gideon, who returned it with a soft, approving smile. The room followed the frame she'd set. I raised my glass quietly, and alone. It hit me like a cold wave. This wasn't her wedding, it was her show. And I was background noise. I remembered her words from years ago. "You taught me what loyalty looks like." It echoed soft, bitter against the scene before me. She used to speak of me in present tense. Now she celebrated the past she left behind. My phone buzzed. Tobias found something in her documents. "Meet me after dinner." My pulse jumped. Unease and resolve tangled. She may have controlled tonight, but I still held unknown cards. I told myself clearly, I will not be erased. In the bathroom mirror, back in the suite, I jotted a phrase on a napkin. I will not be erased. Sharp ink against soft walls. I rehearsed in my mind what I'd say if I got another mic. Measured, not furious. I would speak not to shame, but to reclaim. I centered myself. Dignity first. Fairness. No cheap theatrics. Outside, the garden shimmered under string lights. I considered walking away, vanishing altogether. But I paused, because sometimes staying is a statement. I stepped onto the veranda. blinked, and froze. A hidden camera lens protruded from behind a column, pointed at me. A cold reminder, every move watched. Tonight, power was shifting under my feet, and I needed to stand steady or I'd fall unseen. The morning air felt fake, too cool, too clean, like it had been filtered through some artificial vent just to sell the illusion of calm. I made my way to the bridal suite, trying not to look like someone who was about to crack a wall wide open. I knocked once, twice. A stylist peeked out. "She's almost ready," she said, voice chirpy. But that chirp had tension behind it. I stepped inside anyway. The room buzzed with too much energy. Hair dryers, hairspray, laughter that sounded like it had been practiced. And in the middle of it, Mavis. She was wearing a tailored silk blouse, one hand on her hip, the other waving around like she was directing traffic. "No, not those chairs. Those are for the cocktail hour," she barked. Evelyn sat near the window. Her eyes flicked to mine, then darted away, fast, like it burned to look. I took a step toward her. "Can we talk?" I said, low. Mavis didn't miss a beat. "Let's not make a scene," she sang too loud for the room size. "It's her big day." I turned to her. My voice stayed calm. "It's her day, not yours. Let's not confuse the spotlight." She leaned in, lips barely moving. "Still playing the wise husband?" Then that half smile, the one that said, "You're out of your league, old man." I said nothing, just turned and walked out. I'd seen enough. Outside, the heat was building. I headed toward the back of the venue where the vendor trucks were parked. That's where I found Tobias, my longtime friend, and these days the only person who didn't pretend around me. He was holding an envelope. No greeting, no small talk, just handed it to me like a loaded gun. I opened it. Trust documents, transfers, signatures, dates, 3 weeks ago. Mavis had quietly moved multiple assets into her sister's name, including the beach house I'd bought 5 years back. The one she claimed was ours. I flipped to the last page. That property was now in a trust, one that didn't have my name anywhere. Tobias didn't flinch. "She timed it while you were out of town, filed it under a holding name in Houston. You wouldn't have seen it unless you were looking." I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, but because it made sense now. The wedding, the theatrics, the sudden push for family unity, all of it was smoke. This was the fire. "She's finalizing the rest tomorrow," Tobias said. "If she does, there's no legal foothold left for you." I stared at the hills behind the venue. Silent, still. And then I exhaled through my nose. "Okay," I said. "Time for a new script." I didn't run. I didn't yell. I just walked. Back to the groom's lounge where everything looked like a catalog. Pressed suits, leather-bound flasks, a groomsman laughing too loud at nothing. I pulled out my phone. "Meet me," I said when she answered. Mavis paused. "Where?" "The Orchid Conservatory. 10 minutes. It was quiet in there, soft light through glass. Butterflies moving slow, like they knew something heavy was about to happen. She arrived on time, heels clicking. I had the document open on the table. No ceremony. "Explain this." She didn't look surprised, just annoyed. "It's legal, nothing you can do." I studied her face. She really believed I wouldn't push back. I nodded. "Then let me be clear. You reverse it by tonight, or I take it to the mic. Reception. Right after the first toast." Her jaw tightened. "You wouldn't embarrass your own daughter." "No," I said, "but I'd expose a lie. You don't want that." "You're bluffing." I leaned in. "Try me." She walked out without another word. Back in my suite, I sat down. Not on the edge of the bed, not slouched like a man who's lost. I sat at the desk, opened a notebook, and I started writing. Not threats, not drama, just facts. I wrote down how it started, when it shifted, how the trust documents came to be. A statement. One I hoped I wouldn't have to read, but would if it came to that. A quote floated up. My uncle years ago. "Real power doesn't roar. It whispers until everyone leans in." I called my attorney, sent over the docs, started the injunction process. When I hung up, I looked at myself in the mirror, not as a husband, not as a father, but as a man finally done being managed. Outside, music started. I stood, folded the document, and slid it into my jacket pocket. Game on. The hours between dawn and dusk felt endless that day, as if time itself was giving me a chance to gather every weapon I needed. I left my suite under the pretense of checking final guest lists, but instead I walked straight to Mavis's office. The door was ajar. Someone inside had either forgotten or assumed I would not risk entry. Inside, her desk was disordered. Manila folders lay open, binders stacked. On the monitor, a spreadsheet, and beneath it, a contract titled, Gideon P.R. Mavis Hargrave, the Power Comeback Campaign. I stared at the opening paragraph. Promises of brand partnerships, image consulting, staged roles for both of us, but with her name always first. My role was secondary, supporting. Tobias's warning clicked into place. This wasn't just property theft. This was narrative theft. She'd been rewriting our marriage behind my back. My mind flashed to her earlier words. We build our story together. That phrase now felt like a set-up trap. The ideal we'd shared had never been ours at all, but hers alone. I selected the files one by one, downloading them into a secure folder on my phone. No signs, no traces left behind. I closed everything, returned the documents exactly where I'd found them, and slipped out quietly. Back at the groom's lounge, the air already felt different, tauter. My phone buzzed again. I checked the notifications. Headlines that never should have existed. Hargrave's husband confronts control issues. Polished woman, silent man, the true story behind the smiles. I heard whispers behind my back. 2 guests passing in the hallway, tone hushed. That must be him. I heard she's launching her career. He's a footnote. I didn't flinch. I watched Mavis walk in, graceful, composed, greeting someone near the door. She tilted her head in my direction and said, loud enough for those around us, "Is there a problem?" I held my phone up. Her expression didn't change. Her eyes didn't widen. "You've seen it." Her voice was ironic. "That article, they always exaggerate, Andrew. You know how the press is." To her, media lies were a burden. To me, they were tools. I kept my tone level. "Maybe, but we'll see which lies survive after tonight." I turned and left, each step precise, knowing she was watching. When I reached the concierge, I requested a seating chart. The clerk hesitated. I set my jaw. "I need adjustments. Mavis and Gideon go to the back. I want the front center for my speech." He pressed his lips, consulting his tablet, then nodded. I moved toward the hallway outside the event hall. My mind raced through everything I'd uncovered. The trust documents, the PR contract, the media smear. All of it pointed to a pattern, a campaign using me as collateral. My hand shook barely as I reviewed the media file on my phone. Yes, I was angry, but I refused to be rash. Strategy first. Then she appeared. Mavis, blocking the corridor. She looked at me, posture firm. "You can't do this. Not here. Not today." I stopped in front of her, heart steady. Truth doesn't need theatrics, it just needs to be heard. She stepped closer. "You think you can outplay me? Go ahead, say it. I'll respond. And when I do, no one will believe you." I met her eyes, cool. "Then let them decide who's telling the lie." She hissed. "You'll regret crossing me." I stepped past her, brushing her arm on the way. The curtain to the hall loomed ahead. The music was dimly audible, guests settling. I inhaled and exhaled. In my jacket pocket, the media file waited. I touched the edge of the curtain. I walked forward knowing the shift had begun. When I stepped into the reception hall, the noise hit me first. Laughter, glasses clinking, the kind of surface joy that hides tension beneath. People milled about in soft suits and polished smiles, unaware that in a few minutes, that entire illusion would fracture. The lights were brighter than they should have been, and cameras were positioned at perfect angles. Too perfect for a family gathering. That's when I realized Mavis hadn't planned a celebration. She'd built a stage. She stood near the dais, radiant, poised, greeting guests with a charm that had always disarmed them. Her hand brushed Gideon's arm as she introduced him to a sponsor couple. Casual but too comfortable. I carried the envelope, the drive, and the printed documents inside my jacket. Every step I took toward that stage was measured, deliberate. She caught my eye across the room. For the first time in weeks, she looked uncertain. Maybe she sensed the shift. Or maybe she just didn't expect me to show up this prepared. The MC tapped the microphone, smiling nervously. "Before we move to the final toast, we have a few words from Andrew." That wasn't planned, but I didn't hesitate. Walking to the podium, I adjusted my cuff, taking a steadying breath. "Thank you," I began, voice calm. "Today was meant to celebrate family. But before we continue, I think it's fair you all know what kind of family story has been written on your behalf." The room quieted. A murmur rippled across the crowd as I reached into my jacket and placed a small USB drive into the AV port. The screens flickered to life behind me. First, the trust documents appeared. Mavis's signature beside her sister's, dated 3 weeks prior. Then, the PR contract, her name beside Gideon's. Headline mock-ups reading, "Redemption Couple, the Hargrave Rebrand." Gasps broke the still air. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" I didn't raise my voice. 3 weeks ago, while I was out of town, these assets, properties, funds, and our shared investments were quietly moved. This, I gestured to the second file, was the press plan for the story you were supposed to see next week. A story painting her as a visionary survivor, and me, the obstacle. Mavis froze where she stood, Gideon's complexion drained of color. I continued, steady as if I were reading court testimony. "When you tell a lie long enough, people start to believe it. But power," I paused, letting the quote hang in the air, "isn't taken, it's revealed." A few guests clapped. Others sat in disbelief, eyes darting between me and the screen. Mavis stepped forward suddenly, voice strained but practiced. "Andrew, you're twisting business documents into gossip. This isn't the place." "Then where is the place, Mavis?" I asked, meeting her eyes. "When you sold our story to a PR firm, when you wrote me out of my own life, or when you smiled and told everyone here how strong our partnership was?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Security approached the stage, unsure which side to protect. She motioned to cut the feed, but the technician shook his head. "Mr. Hargrave gave direct authorization," he said quietly. I looked at the crowd, not angry, not smug. This isn't revenge, it's clarity. Every man has the right to reclaim his truth when it's been sold without his consent. I turned toward Gideon. "You were part of it, don't deny it. The emails say enough." He shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "You're overreacting." I cut him off. "Then why does your firm hold the contract?" The silence that followed was the kind that bends time, long, uncomfortable, final. Then, a voice from the crowd. "He's right." Another joined, and another. Soon, applause built. Hesitant at first, then full. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I simply stepped back from the mic and said, "The truth doesn't always need an audience. But since you gave it one, I thought you should hear both sides." I left the stage, walking straight past her. Mavis turned as I passed, eyes glassy but defiant. I stopped beside her, lowered my voice so only she could hear. "You could have chosen honesty. Now all you've got left is performance." She didn't reply. Her throat tightened, jaw set. As I moved toward the exit, a folded napkin brushed my hand. The same one from the rehearsal dinner, where she'd written, "For us, always." I kept it in my pocket, not as a token, but as a reminder. The clapping softened behind me, replaced by whispers. Some would believe her, others would believe me. But it didn't matter anymore. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me steady again. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the start of mine. Chapter 8. The Fallout Final Strike. The silence right after my reveal wasn't just awkward. It was tectonic. You could feel the plates shift. Forks paused midair, hands froze on cocktail glasses, and no one knew where to look. Some avoided my eyes, others stared straight at me, waiting for whatever came next. The file I projected was still on the screen, her name, Gideon's, and mine, all tangled up in contracts and edits meant to erase me. Mavis stepped back slowly, her smile long gone, replaced with a tight jaw and clenched fists. Gideon lingered by the edge of the stage, not saying a word, but his posture screamed discomfort. The staff moved like they were dodging landmines, switching lights, adjusting the visuals, trying to bring order to something that had already exploded. My phone vibrated in my jacket. I didn't even check who it was. Probably legal, maybe media, maybe family. Everyone wanted a piece now. I stood still and let it ring. I didn't owe anyone a reaction. Across the room, I caught Orson's face. For a second, I thought he'd be gloating, but no, he looked off balance. The man who never blinked was suddenly blinking a lot. Maybe for the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. I just watched him. Then, without me touching a thing, the screen behind the stage changed again. It wasn't part of my plan. A backup file I had buried deep but still tied to the feed had kicked in. There it was, the clause from the secondary contract, the one Mavis signed when she tried to isolate me from family assets. She thought she'd covered it, but she forgot the addendum. I read it aloud. Clear, no venom, just the truth. Mavis turned sharply, eyes wide. She hadn't expected that part to see daylight. A gasp came from somewhere in the crowd. Gideon actually clapped once, slow, sarcastic. Good comeback, he muttered. I didn't look at him. Don't applaud me, I said. Study your own signature. More phones came out. Cameras clicked. Every lens was on her now, and for the first time tonight she didn't speak. Her mouth opened, but nothing came. The room, full of people who once called her bold, elegant, brilliant, now saw her as something else entirely. The judgment came in silence, not shouts. Orson, trying to reclaim some thread of authority, rose from his seat. This is our family, he said, voice strained. We shouldn't tear it apart in front of everyone. He stretched out a hand like he could still gather us under one banner. But I was already walking toward him, the speech I'd written, one I no longer needed, still folded in my palm. I stopped short of him and said, "Unity built on lies falls apart." And with that, I pressed a button on my phone. New images filled the screen, screenshots of messages Mavis sent about me. Private, cold. He's not even relevant anymore, one read. Another, I'll phase him out by summer. They weren't meant for anyone to see, especially not family. Orson looked like someone pulled the floor from under him. His hand dropped, his gaze scattered. Somewhere to my right, someone whispered, "He's finally shown who held the strings." It hit harder than any argument I could have made. Then, right when things should have landed, a new voice cut through. "May I call attention to our original groom," the MC said, his voice shaky. "Mr. Arlo. Jackson Hale." The guy had fumbled all night. Now he'd dropped a live grenade. People turned. Not to Gideon, to me. Mavis spun to face him. "You had one job," she hissed under her breath. Not quiet enough. The room snapped. Just like that, the tension splintered into sides. Some leaned toward her, still clinging to the image they'd bought into. Most turned to me, finally seeing through the fog. I walked back to the stage. My steps were even, calm. I took the mic again and nodded to Jackson. "Thank you for restoring clarity." The applause started slow. Then it grew. Not wild or over the top, but solid, earnest. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like setting something back in place after years of watching it tilt. I didn't look around for more approval. I didn't need it. As I stepped off the stage, I passed Mavis. Her face wasn't angry anymore. It was something else, emptier. And in my pocket, I still had the folded napkin from rehearsal. I'd kept it, not for nostalgia, but because it had one final purpose. But before I could get to that, something clicked in me. She'd done something else, something I hadn't seen yet. And when it surfaced, it wouldn't just burn me. It'd leave a mark on us both that we'd carry forever. Chapter 9. The Resolution. Moving Beyond the Past. The morning light poured in slow and quiet through the tall glass doors of the beach house. Oregon fog rolled just beyond the shore, softening the edge of the world. I sat on the porch, alone, holding a heavy ceramic mug filled with black coffee. Strong, no sugar. The steam drifted up like breath I hadn't let out in months. The phone on the table beside me didn't buzz. No calls, no news alerts, no anxious dings from attorneys or relatives. Just stillness. Last night, everything I held in cracked open in front of hundreds of eyes. And now, there was nothing more to hide. Nothing left to defend. I lifted the contract still in my lap. Creased, worn, circled in red. The same one that once defined my worth in someone else's world. I studied it one last time, not with anger, but curiosity. Then I folded it into fourths and set it down. Not tossed, not ripped, just done. My phone lit up once. It was from my sister. Just 2 lines. "You were brilliant. Thank you." I read it again, and something in my chest settled. Not healed, but steady. The wound was still fresh, but it had stopped bleeding. Then came her voice. Mavis. A voice message. Not a call. Not a typed message. I played it, letting the words land as they came. She sounded tired, strained, not angry, not even defensive, just worn down. She said, I didn't mean to underestimate you. Pause. I just thought I could manage it, and then it spun. Orson pushed. I followed. I didn't think you'd care. Another pause. I was wrong. You cared more than any of us ever did. Then silence. And finally, I'm sorry you saw it all that way. Not sorry for what she did. Sorry I saw it. I sat there holding the phone, not speaking, then tapped delete, not out of spite, just closure. That was the last chapter she'd ever write in my story. And I meant it when I whispered to no one, that chapter's closed. Later that morning, I drove into town. No fanfare. Just me, jeans, and a flannel. I parked outside a small bookstore, one I hadn't visited since before the wedding, before the brand deals, before all of it. The bell above the door jingled softly as I walked in. I wandered the aisles like I used to, slow, curious, present, and then her voice. Is that who I think it is? I turned. Mrs. Kemple, white hair now, but sharp eyes, same as always. She used to mentor me when I was just starting out in college. She'd pushed me once to write my own name, not borrow someone else's success. She gave me a once-over and said, You're standing taller. I smiled. It's been a long year. She leaned in, warm and firm. The best thing you ever did was stop pretending to be less. It hit me hard. Not because I hadn't heard it before, but because I finally believed it. I bought a notebook and a pen before heading back. The beach house was still quiet when I returned. I made lunch, just toast and eggs, and opened the notebook. Not to journal, to draft, a business plan, a blueprint, a new one. No partnerships I didn't trust, no names borrowed, just me building from scratch, and not out of revenge, but out of clarity. By late afternoon, I opened a wooden box I'd brought up from storage. Inside, my old wedding band. Photos from a charity gala. A small silver pen Mavis gave me our first year together. I laid each one in gently, then closed the lid. I didn't throw them out. I just didn't need them where I could see them. Just before sunset, I walked down to the beach barefoot. The tide pulled at the sand with quiet strength. The wind pushed hair into my eyes, and I let it. I didn't talk out loud, but inside the words were loud enough. Love isn't performance. Trust isn't blind. Silence isn't peace. Strength, I learned, isn't in the strike. It's in the stillness after. Before I went back inside, I pulled out a sheet of paper. I wrote a letter, not to Mavis, not to Orson, to the version of me that tried too hard, waited too long, forgave too quickly. The man who bent himself to fit instead of standing tall. I wrote it, signed it, folded it in thirds, and placed it in the same wooden box. Then I smiled. Real. Not bitter, just full. Back in the house, I locked the front door, turned the key, took one last look, and just as I stepped away from the porch, I heard it. A voice. One I hadn't heard in years, calling my name.